liberty, and justice for all. Turn over the gavel to Murphy while I introduce the bill.
It being 9:15, I'm going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 60 and recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Senate Bill 60 is a bill that in New Hampshire, we have a history of allowing horse racing and betting in horse racing, as we had 4 tracks within the state. What this bill seeks to do is allow, right now, you can't vote on you can't bet on the Kentucky Derby unless you go to one of 2 locations in the state of New Hampshire. You have to physically go there if you want to place a bet. This bill would allow you to be able to place your bet on your phone or possibly at other locations, but it allows you to have what's called advanced deposit wagering. We have an interstate compact as it relates to the federal government has interstate compact on horse racing that deals with this topic. However, our statute is antiquated in that it still deals with phone lines. In the way used to be, you could have an account at a track and you can call the track and place your bet at the track and do that. However, nowadays everything's online and digital. So this just modernizes the bill and says that we would allow people to be able to use their phone to place a bet on the Kentucky Derby or the Preakness or any of the other horse races that they want. That's it. That's the bill. We've heard this before last year. We passed it before last year. The House had problems with it. I think I might have resolved the issues over in the House this year. So, but it's the same exact bill as the Senate passed last year.
Any questions of the prime sponsor? Senator
Do you know
Sullivan.
what, thank you, and thank you for taking the question. Do you know what the issues were that the House had with it?
Well, there's 2. So I will say, I did make one change in the bill. If you look on page 2, line 12, it has the tax rate in there of 1.25%. Last year's bill had a higher tax rate. 1.25% is the tax rate that we currently charge the 2 locations that will allow you to place bet on the horse. And so it would have made the online more higher tax than in person. So I adjusted the bill this year to be the tax rate's the same. So whether you're doing it online or you go to the 2 locations you can bet, the tax rate's the same either way.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Senator Lang. Mr. McIntyre, first or last? First it is.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Charlie McIntyre, Director of the Lottery. With me is Cooley Arroyo, our Chief Compliance Officer.
Morning.
Very briefly, I think last session, we requested actually Senator Lang to file this bill because it cleans up an area where there has been activity. There actually is this activity going on in the state. It is not regulated, and we do not receive any funds from it. This is quite similar to what happened with fantasy sports, where it was an activity that was happening in the state. It was not quite legal. The AG's office had recommended we file a bill to make fantasy sports legal. We did. It is now regulated. There are consumer protections around it. If there's a problem with the platform, we get a phone call and we'll manage the customers' complaints. And also we get a little bit of money from it. So we're here in favor of this and happy to answer any questions you folks have.
Charlie again. So this was a gray area in our state law, and there was a question whether we would be able to provide consumer protections, if I remember. Is that right?
Correct. If folks call us, we have no recourse over the operators because they're not in state. They're not regulated by Cooley's division. So we're like in sports betting, quite literally, it comes to our Cooley, to our head of sports betting, and that is followed up with the operator, and we are able to manage customer complaints that way.
So again, if a citizen in New Hampshire were to have an issue right now, there's nothing you could do. If someone won't pay them, there's no recourse for the state or anything else. Whereas once this bill passes, they could call you. They don't have to worry about whether they're betting legal or illegal because it would be legal, and you'd be able to take action.
And regrettably, sometimes they have what we call the Atlantic Ocean defense, which means the operator is across the Atlantic, and it's one of those come get me for my money.
Senator Murphy.
How frequent do you get complaints, or does your department get complaints, or are you aware of any complaints you've ever had regarding this issue?
We haven't had any that I'm aware of.
My opinion is, this is kind of like, are you gonna complain when your drug dealer rips you off? Right? You know, you're not gonna get very many complaints if someone thinks they're doing something, you know. not
Yeah.
Senator Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Just curious, there's no new funding allocated for oversight. Are you worried enforcement could be under-resourced for this?
I don't believe so, especially with the volume of participation with this program already. And I think the opportunity to do rulemaking and put some guardrails around this too would get ahead of issues too that could arise in the future.
Senator, we're not an agency that packs on people for no reason, and so we feel that our current staffing is sufficient to handle this activity in addition to our other activities.
Thank you.
Anything else? Seeing none? Thank you, sir. Mr. Brogdon, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Peter Bragdon, recovering senator and senior policy advisor at Party Strategies here in Concord, here today representing Churchill Downs. Churchill Downs is probably best known as the home of the Kentucky Derby, probably the most famous horse racing event in the world, and the longest continuing run sporting event in America. This will be on the first Saturday in May this year, the 151st running of the Kentucky Derby. Churchill Downs is a publicly traded corporation. We have more than 30 racetracks and gaming facilities in about a dozen states, including Chasers Poker Room in Salem. We also have our Twin Spires app, which offers advanced deposit wagering, the subject of this bill, which I'll call ADW to save some words. We offer ADW and live video from all the major racetracks in the United States and around the world. Advanced deposit wagering is simply stated online betting on horse races. SB 60 would give certainty and predictability to the regulation of ADW in New Hampshire. It would provide a consistent and level playing field for all the operators and help ensure a secure experience for consumers. Just a little bit of background, the Federal Interstate Horse Racing Act of 1978 allowed for betting on horse racing via electronic means. Prior to that, the only way to do it was to go to the racetrack. So in 1978, Congress passed a law which allowed electronic betting, which started as telephone bets, and then obviously over time has morphed into internet betting, desktop, laptop, now mobile apps. The Interstate Horse Racing Act also allowed states to regulate this electronic betting on racing. Many states passed legislation to regulate ADW, much like it's being proposed here. About a dozen states, I think, actually passed laws that said you can't do it at all. So it's not allowed in that state. And there's a bunch of states, and I forget the exact number, I'm thinking around 15 to 20, that didn't take any action whatsoever. And so the federal law kind of says you can do it. And so it's been happening in a number of states, including New Hampshire. All the states, except those that specifically ban it, advanced deposit wagering is available. And as was mentioned before, for New Hampshire and a bunch of other states, it's a gray area because it's the argument is the federal law kind of supersedes anything in the state that doesn't specifically talk about it. So the lack of, as was mentioned, the lack of any state regulation here makes it a quote gray area. Early in 2022, Churchill Downs approached the New Hampshire Lottery Commission about its desire to purchase the Chasers Poker Room in Salem. New Hampshire Lottery Commission and the Attorney General have very strict guidelines on who can operate charitable gaming facilities, and there's very little room in there for gray areas. So understanding that concern, Churchill Downs voluntarily shut down their ADW operation in New Hampshire. And Churchill Downs is the leading one in the nation, operator of ADW platforms. We voluntarily shut that down in 22 and pledged to work with the Lottery Commission to support legislation that would clarify this and take out the gray area and make a definitive statement for New Hampshire what's going to happen. Not any admission that the prior activities were not right. It was just we want to have a good relationship with our regulator. We own a charitable gaming facility in New Hampshire, and we don't want to get stuck in arguments about gray areas. So we voluntarily pulled out. That creates a unique situation here. And Senator Lang, when he introduced the bill, said right now you can't place a bet on the Kentucky Derby in New Hampshire electronically. Yes, you can, because all of our other competitors are still operating in New Hampshire. We voluntarily stepped aside just to make sure the relationship is good with the regulator, and we pledged to work towards putting in regulations that do this. But our competitors are allowed to operate freely in the state, and we are not because we pulled ourselves out. This has been asked for by the New Hampshire Lottery and the Attorney General, like I said, to clarify this. It does nothing to prevent the AG from coming in and if determined something happened illegally in the past with any operators going after them. But it's really just to give a solid base to regulation to allow a level playing field for all competitors. So I hope you find the bill ought to pass. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you, Senator.
That's all the people who have signed up to speak. Is there anybody else in the room that wishes to speak on Senate Bill 60? Seeing none, the online registrations were 2 in favor, 1 opposed. And with that, I'll close the public hearing on Senate Bill 60. We have a couple minutes to wait before I get into the next one. So we'll be hanging out for a minute.
Time being 9:30, open the hearing for Senate Bill 63. Recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Lang.
Thank you, members of the committee. I'm going to ask you to do some math. I'm Senator Tim Lang from Senate District 2, the Lakes region, all the way up to Campton and Thornton. So this bill is basically a fix for a change we made a couple years ago to the way we deal with the rooms and meals tax and how we allocate distribution. A couple years ago, we created the Municipal Revenue Fund, which allows the rooms and meals tax to be the amount that goes to municipalities to be transferred in. But the way that law was originally written, part of the other piece of that revenue share is that 3.15% of the net operating money that came in would go to travel and tourism for them to advertise our state in other states and bring people into our state. And it's been wildly successful. Our rooms and meals tax has gone through the roof through their efforts of bringing people in and advertising down in the city of Boston and that kind of thing. However, when we created that municipal revenue fund, we adjusted the formula, and instead of taking it out of all the money that was generated by rooms and meals tax, we took the municipal piece out. And then we calculated 3.15%, which resulted in a drastic decrease in revenue to the tourism department. This bill just seeks to fix it and put it back the way it was, to say that we give the tourism division their 3.15% on the whole. And then what's left, we shave off in the municipalities and the other places the money has to go, the education trust fund and everything else. But we take that 3.15% off the top, which is what we'd always done until we made this law change, and DRA interpreted it to mean that it became out of the net instead of the gross. So this bill just fixes that problem, gives the tourism industry back. Again, as we've seen, when we look at the rooms and meals tax later on, we're showing the how that revenue, that's one of the revenues that's been steadily increasing and going up and meeting metrics. And our goal is to keep it doing that. And to do that, we need to give our BEA and the tourism division the money they need to go bring tourists into our state. That's the bill.
Thank you. Any questions, Senator Lang? Seeing none, thank you. Chair recognizes Cheryl Reardon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Cheryl Reardon, and I'm the president of the White Mountain Attractions Association, the destination marketing organization for the White Mountains region. Today, I speak on behalf of the tourism industry of New Hampshire, a vital sector that employs over 70,000 individuals and plays a crucial role in our state's economy. I'm here to express our industry's strong support for Senate Bill 63, which seeks to reverse the modification to the calculation of the meals and rentals tax revenue used to determine the budget for the Division of Travel and Tourism. The importance of this bill cannot be overstated. The current statutory formula for funding the Division of Travel and Tourism Development imposes a significant reduction of over 40% in marketing funds available for fiscal years 2026 and 2027. This reduction is based on a calculation method that frankly jeopardizes the potential growth and sustainability of our tourism sector. By adjusting the funding calculation to occur before transfers to the municipal revenue fund, as was the practice prior to fiscal year 2022, we can restore essential funding levels that support strong and successful tourism marketing efforts for fiscal years starting in 2028. Research conducted by the state's Travel and Tourism Office has consistently shown that every dollar spent on tourism marketing yields a double-digit return on investment, as much as $17 in recent years. This return on investment illustrates the efficiency and effectiveness of our state's tourism marketing, a crucial tool for attracting visitors. By restoring and safeguarding funding for these initiatives, Senate Bill 63 will enable the Division of Travel and Tourism Development, along with our regional associations and chambers through programs like the Joint Promotional Program, to continue promoting New Hampshire's unique attractions, outdoor recreation, tax-free shopping, and locally crafted products. Although we experienced favorable weather last year, some areas have seen a slowdown in visitation, demonstrating that our industry is not immune to economic fluctuations. The current report of increases in meals and rentals tax revenue of 4% is attributed not solely to visitation numbers, but also to businesses adjusting their prices to manage rising operational costs. A cut in marketing funds at this delicate time would undermine the Travel and Tourism Department and our industry's efforts to attract tourists and would be counterproductive to the economic well-being of New Hampshire and the financial support for other public services that are subsidized by the state's operating budget. In summary, the proposed change in Senate Bill 63 is not merely a fiscal adjustment. It's a necessary action to ensure the continued growth and success of our tourism industry. Without it, we risk losing in the next biennium up to $140 million in potential tax revenues and potentially more in future years, a staggering figure that we cannot afford to overlook. Therefore, we urge you to support Senate Bill 63 and help protect an industry that not only is vital to our economy, but also embodies the vibrant culture and community that defines New Hampshire. Thank you for your time today and for hearing our testimony.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Cheryl.
Thank
So
you.
Cheryl represents the White Mountain Attractions Association. Natch. So we have Natch coming up. He represents PIA. in support of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nate Grays, and representing the Business and Industry Association, we support this legislation. As you've heard, every dollar spent on the travel and tourism budget ends up in about $17 in return for our state in economic activity. Obviously, there's a direct line between how well our members do, particularly in the travel and tourism side of things, and the revenues collected by the state through the business and enterprise tax and the business profits tax, as well as the meals and rooms tax. So frankly, the more we can do for this budget, the better the state ends up economically, which is good for our members and it's good for the state revenues down the line. So we're strongly in support of this bill. Happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the room that wishes to testify on Senate Bill 63? Seeing none. We had a total of 4 other people sign in support in the room from Ski New Hampshire, New Hampshire Travel, New Hampshire Lodging and Restaurant Association, the Retail Association, all supporting the bill. Online, we had 5 supporters, nobody in opposition to the bill. And with that, seeing there's nobody else in the room, we'll close the public hearing on Senate Bill 63. I'd entertain a motion to go in executive session so we can talk about this bill.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to go into the executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We're in executive session. So let's talk about Senate Bill 63, the one we just heard. There was no opposition to the bill. I'm inclined to have someone move OTP on this or have someone move OTP. Is
I'm
there
about to
any?
pass.
Second.
Been moved by Senator Murphy, seconded by Senator Fenton, ought to pass on Senate Bill 63. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. I entertain a motion for consent.
So moved.
Been moved by Senator Fenton, seconded by Senator Murphy to put the bill on consent. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Since it's my bill, I'll take it out, but it'll be on consent, so it's a light lift. And with that, we'll close the executive session. And we'll hang out for another 7 minutes.
What day? February 26th.
My hearing today in ED&A is at
It being the appointed time of, yeah, we have a copy of it. It being the appointed time, we're going to open a public hearing on Senate Bill 275 and recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator David Waters, District 4, introduced Senate Bill 275, and the committee will have an amendment before it, which makes some needed changes. And so I will talk to the amendment and also the part of the original bill that remains even after the amendment. So I approached this bill to thinking about what we might do to clarify the nonprofit status and thus the tax exemption for child care centers. What I had heard was that some assessors had looked at the nonprofit status of child care centers and said, no, actually don't qualify for the tax exemption. And then other assessors in other communities would see their designation and say, fine. So I had been looking to clarify that. I had originally a little more expansive bill that was going to provide tax relief potentially to a larger group. But after working with Health and Human Services, the Licensing Bureau and the Center for Nonprofits came up with the language to see in the amendment. So what this is simply meant to do is to clarify under the term charitable, which is what we use to designate something as having a tax exemption, have the meaning set forth in RSA 7223 L, and then be recognized by Internal Revenue Service as a 501c3 nonprofit and be a registered charitable organization in good standing with this state. This is the language that the Center for Nonprofits and others thought would work to provide the clarification that if you are a nonprofit child care center that meets this definition, you do qualify for that charitable tax exemption. The other part of the bill, which remains from the original bill, has to do with school building aid. It came to my attention that a lot of communities, because they may have some extra classrooms, would like to establish early childhood centers, and that under the current statute, which limited that to kindergarten through grade 12, what was happening when they would get the school building aid grant, they'd have to X out the square footage of the classroom that might be used as a early child care center and not include that. So I worked with Department of Education folks and others to come up with this language to simply strike kindergarten and include preschool, so that if a district wants to come forward and do a renovation or an addition that would handle preschool, that they now would have that square footage also qualify potentially for school building aid. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Questions from the committee? So I guess I have a question around the changing of the definition in section 7 there for the work for charitable. Do you know if this has any other impact relative to things like social clubs that are not-for-profit charitable organizations, or any other of those Oddfellow homes, or those we had a bill last year that dealt with changing tax function and requiring that they not be taxed?
I don't,
As a state
thank you, I don't believe so. I think that what this is that it provides the child care centers who may have been denied some language which will help clarify in that conversation with the assessor that if they meet these criteria, that indeed they're a charitable operation. And this is the language the Center for Nonprofits thought would work. Now, whether that clarification would extend to others, I suppose possibly, but I think that the definition itself, on the face of it, offered in the amendment, is what we mean by charitable. That if you know, here's who recognized you as a charity, the IRS, state statute, and you have that particular status of the 501c3 that clarifies it. So
Do we have a different definition of charity in any other statute anywhere else? So we have two competing definitions?
I do not believe so because this goes back to 7223, and you can look that up.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Next up is Jim Michard from Hudson. Jim, you said you were speaking, but not whether you're for or opposed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members of Senate Ways and Means. For the record, my name is Jim Michaud. I'm the Chief Assessor for the town of Hudson. And as I frequently do when I come up to the legislature, I look at the technical aspects of these bills. And I understand that there's been an amendment introduced that probably, obviates the first part of my testimony. The way the bill was originally written, for-profit corporations such as KinderCare, with a market cap of $2.4 billion, we have a KinderCare in Hudson, would be able to qualify for an educational tax exemption. Furthermore, under the original wording of the bill, if I own my house and I establish a child care daycare agency and I had one child, my house would be 100% exempt from property taxes. So I understand that this bill, the amendment, seeks to make it clear that it's a nonprofit corporation that would be the one qualifying for it, as registered under 501c3, and also that they would be in good standing, and also that would be in conformance with the existing definition of charitable as it applies to property tax exemption properties. But looking at educational exemptions, we have to look at what the standards are that the courts have laid out for what qualifies for an educational tax exemption for properties. And the case that's most frequently cited is New Canaan Academy versus Canaan from 1982. And it laid out a four-part test that communities are to follow in examining whether or not a property that applies for an educational tax exemption should get it. So I don't see that the amendment, changes that case law. And I don't see that the original bill changes that case law either. So there's still going to be a test, as there should be, to determine whether or not, they could be 501c3 and they could be registered with the Secretary of State and they can meet the definition of charitable, but they still have to meet the educational test. And so that's not going to change under this. And, I don't know that there's a document put out by the Department of Revenue or by the Board of Tax and Land Appeals that gives some talking points on this or some guideposts for the stakeholders. We literally have to look to the case law. So it might be helpful if that came to be, that there was something that both municipalities and the stakeholders could benefit from by looking at the same criteria in black and white, sort of fitting on the four quarters of the page, rather than looking at, old case law. And that's the extent of my testimony. I was going to submit this to you in writing, but with the amendment, I think I'm going to have to wait. Thank you. I'll take any questions you would have.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next up is Bertie DeShays. Bertie, you want to testify? Yep. Oh, sorry. You were in opposition. Nope, that's fine. That's all the speakers. Oh, I'm sorry, Julie Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here to oppose this bill. I'm getting hosed by City Hall and its property taxes. The worst assault on me and my neighbors took place 2 years ago when the whole city was appraised. And let me tell you that we are not all in this together. My tax quadrupled. Then the following election 2 years ago, which also included the mayor, his routine David Letterman-style prologue to all his town hall events, which a member of this committee attended several of, was a preemptive statement that commercial properties have depreciated. thus implying that homeowners were to make up for it. Sadly, that comment didn't stop him and most of his accomplices from getting reelected. If what he said is true, then all business properties already are getting a discount, and this bill seeks to make the situation worse. Furthermore, it's giving special treatment to a selected group of businesses at the expense of people who have no use for said businesses, people without kids, people like me, who are already tax plantation serfs. Several years ago, and while my ex-boyfriend's kids were enrolled in an after-school program, I visited the facility many times. And it's evolved into a real monster industrial complex over the years and is presently valued at $11.3 million, a number I suspect was lowballed by Vision Government Solutions, the contractor hired by City Hall to appraise city property. Small World can pay its own taxes just fine. Plus, they are a significant consumer of city resources and contributor to the extra volume of neighborhood traffic. I mentioned what happened 2 years ago tax-wise, but we didn't get that expected 5-year reprieve from another citywide appraisal. We got slammed with another one last fall, which blindsided even many of the aldermen, as one can observe in video. City Hall is literally trying to tax the bottom tier of property owners into homelessness, and this bill is a slap in the face on top of that. So much for all this housing crisis talk, which has been an election cycle buzzword. How is this bill helping anyone facing any kind of housing-related distress? And lastly, I had zero clue that this bill was on the ballot last November when I voted for my senator. I am appalled to see his name on it. The purpose of government is to protect our rights, not provide more sitter service by way of redistributionism, or simply known as robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's what's going on tax-wise. I'll also point out that taxation is theft, but cities and towns could at least give equal treatment to all businesses. We've had more than enough of government cherry-picking the winners and losers during COVID. This bill needs to become ITL. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Julie. Is there anybody else in the room wishes to speak on Senate Bill 275? Just make sure you sign in on the sheet when you're done after you testify.
My name is Michelle Merritt. I'm the president and CEO at New Futures. We worked with the prime sponsor on the amendment. We have some written testimony, so I'm not going to repeat everything, but we are generally supportive of the effort here to clarify the definition of charitable within this section for the benefit of childcare centers, nonprofit childcare centers in New Hampshire. And I'm offering to answer any questions that folks may have. We also worked with the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits around this language, which was determined to be necessary due to some of the experiences that nonprofit childcare centers have had in the state. So I'm happy to answer any questions or work with the committee offline.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
All right,
very
thank you.
much. Is there anybody else wishes to speak on Senate Bill 275? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing on Senate Bill 275. We'll give you, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Which one is first? 83. Yes. And let's get that.
Time being 10 a.m. Time being 10 a.m. Call to order the hearing on Senate Bill 83. Recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Lang.
Thank you, members of the committee, this will be for you. Is there, sorry, Sonia. This bill before you it came out of the summer I served on the gambling commission that looked at gaming as a whole in our state, what the direction was looking at. One of the things we specifically looked at was HHR and how the historic horse racing, or as one of my friends like to call it, dead horse racing, and have it and see what the future of the industry was looking like and whether New Hampshire is keeping pace with the industry and that kind of thing. So this bill does a couple major things. So the first one is over time, due to the growth of the gaming industry, we just acknowledge the fact that it's becoming a significant industry and the lottery has the responsibility, and we rename the division of lottery to Lottery and Gaming. Some of you may or may not know that gaming used to have its own commission all by itself many years ago, and we chose to merge it into lottery. It's now becoming a significant function of lottery, so we just think we should acknowledge it when someone's looking for it, as it has just a name change that goes into it. We'll now call it the State Lottery and Gaming Commission. There's some definitions in here. So a VLT is a slot machine, right? We just the industry name of it's called a VLT. So what we allow to have happen is if you've ever gone to a gaming facility, we have historic horse racing, and I challenge someone who's not in the industry to tell me the difference between a slot machine and a historic horse racing machine. There's not a whole lot of difference. So, however, the place there is a difference is in the operational cost, because HHRs are pari-mutuel betting. There's a component that means a network connectivity, because you're not betting against the machine, you're betting against all the other players that are in the pool, and that's what your prizes are based out of, versus a slot machine, which you're paying against the odds of the machine hitting its number. So the commission decided that it was about we commissioned a study with a company that does gaming studies called Spectrum Gaming. They came out and said that the operational cost for HHR machines is between 12 and 18% is what it costs in addition to what slot, or more than what slot machines would cost. So the commission decided that let's just go to slot machines. We reduce the operational costs while at the same time we'd be increasing revenue both for the operator, the charity, and the state. So this bill does what the commission asked for, which was to legalize regular old slot machines, class 3 machines, also known as video lottery terminals in the state. It sets a tax rate that we'll talk about. I'm going to ask the committee later to amend that tax rate, and I'll have some numbers for you to look at. I reached out to the American Gaming Association as well as Spectrum and asked them to provide me a list of all the tax rates for all the states that allow slot machines, so we can go see where New Hampshire compared in that number as our ratio goes. And I think we'll give it to the committee and we'll talk about that tax rate in executive session. The last thing this does that came out of the commission was in New Hampshire, we're a believer in self-exclusion. If you're having a problem with responsible gaming, that you would go to a facility and you would, at one of our 18 licensed facilities, and you would say, if I come in here, don't let me bet. And your name would go on a list and you could self-exclude. The problem is that if you went to the one in Manchester and did that, you could then walk into the one in Dover and they would accept you readily to game, because they don't have that list. It's only kept in Manchester. So this establishes, through standard responsible gaming principles, a voluntary statewide exclusion list that all the gaming operators will be able to participate in. If somebody puts their name on the list, whether it's through the iLottery platform or whether it's through the sports betting platform, or whether it's through walking into a casino saying, hey, I have a problem, don't let me gamble here, that person would have their name put on the statewide list, so they couldn't walk into any other gaming facility and game. This is a standard across the country. New Hampshire's unique in that we have, instead of having a statewide list, we have an individual facility list or individual application list. So we establish a standard for that as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about revenue splits and how we deal with the revenue that's going to come in. You'll see with the fiscal note, and I'm not sure if you have it yet. If not, Sonia, we should print it out and get it to them, because we do have the fiscal note for it. This is going to create a net revenue. There are currently 1,900, roughly, a little bit more than HHR machines in the state. It's anticipated when all of our operations open up, we're going to have around 4,300. slot machines across the state. So there's going to be a significant revenue increase, and that's mainly due to some new facilities coming online in Nashua, Salem, that part of the state, and some growth that's happening in the industry with some of the existing operators. So let's talk about where the money goes when we get it. So we keep the charities whole, right? The same way we distribute money in terms of slot. We have a 40% tax rate on the gross revenue. Gross revenue is the revenue that's done after we've paid out all the prizes, how much money is available. And the state's looking to take 40% of that. Of that 40%, the charities would get their 35% like they currently do. And then the remainder, the state portion of this, will go into three different buckets. The first bucket is we keep education whole because money goes to education now under the current HHR. We keep that money flowing to education. So this is not an anti-education bill taking revenue from education. The second thing is I established a new fund in here called the Elderly Disabled Blind Deaf Exemption Reimbursement Fund. For those of you who understand how municipalities work and education and tax credits work, the elderly tax credit, when an elderly person goes into their town and applies for an elderly tax credit and that tax credit is granted, that doesn't reduce the amount of money that the town has to take. It just reduces that taxpayer's load on the spending. That money then gets redistributed to other taxpayers within that town that have to pick up that tax credit cost. So it raises, every time they issue a tax credit, somebody else's tax bill goes up. So what I'm looking to do is I'm going to establish a reimbursement fund for municipalities to help with this fund. We want to support our elderly, disabled, blind, and deaf people who are eligible for this credit, but we don't want it to be pushed to other taxpayers. So we're going to take 25% of the revenue coming out of the video slot terminal that's given to the state, and we're going to establish a fund that will reimburse municipalities. So rather than that money going, that cost being pushed to the other local property taxpayers, the state will absorb that. If there's not enough money in the fund, it's a prorated amount, so some could possibly move. Talking to DRA, that load is sitting at about $24 million a year. That's how much money statewide is pushed to other taxpayers by issuing this credit. We would absorb that, so we would take that in. We would use the revenues from this fund to pay that credit in the prorated amount if we don't have enough, so that we can ease the tax burden of all those other taxpayers, so they don't have to absorb the costs of that tax credit for the elderly in our state. The last piece, and probably most controversial piece, is Governor Ayotte is looking to fix. We have an issue still with Group 2 retirement from the changes that were made. And while I was a member of Group 2 retirement way back in the day when I was a law enforcement officer and understand there was some cause for changes that needed to be made back in 2011. There was abuse of the system, gaming of the system that, while completely legal, wasn't the intended the way the Group 2 retirement was supposed to work. And so the legislature, because of both, we were a little aggressive in the actuary to how much it was going to make, and it created a deficit within that fund. We made drastic changes to the Group 2 retirement. And in doing that, we did hurt about 1,700 to 1,800 law enforcement officers who were already well on their way in their career, and then we changed the system. Governor Ayotte wants to move to fix that. But she's going to need revenue to do that. So I'm earmarking 50% of the revenue to that Group 2 issue so that the changes that she's going to be proposing, probably I believe in Group 2, in the HB2 will be funded and has a funding source. I think that's the whole bill. Charlie, did I miss anything? Charlie said I caught everything.
Any questions of this prime sponsor? I have one. Senator.
Yes.
Page 3, line 3. I think you know where I'm going here. To be eligible for a VLT license, the applicant must have been licensed or eligible for a licensure to sell pari-mutuel pools on historic horse racing under RSA 287 as of the effective date of this chapter. Does this have the effect of making the current moratorium on HHR permanent?
No, absolutely not. What that just says that current moratorium, the people who are eligible to do slots and the same people who are eligible to do would be eligible for the moratorium. When the moratorium expires, everybody will be eligible. We didn't want to do, again, the idea was the expansion issue.
So to be clear, if the moratorium expires for historic horse racing, anyone after that date would be able to get a VLT license.
Correct.
That's not the way I read this line. And I just want to be very clear that's what's intended.
The intention is that if you are eligible for an HHR license, you're eligible for a slot license. And the moratorium component has a set expiration date, which means that after that expires, everybody would be eligible.
To be fair, it is the second or third expiration date that's been proposed.
I'm sorry?
To be fair, it is the second or third expiration date that's been considered.
Yeah.
It keeps getting pushed out over and over.
So this doesn't change the expiration date. Again, the current law with the current moratorium expiration would still be valid. And anybody who's eligible now for HHR would be eligible for slots. And when the expiration of the moratorium happens, it would be opened up to everybody.
I might ask Todd or
Same
backing up on that too, to make sure that we're clear. Okay.
That's the intention.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Thank you, Senator Lang. I'm going to go ahead and call Mr. McIntyre back up, please. And I'm going to ask him the same question, or please address the same question in your comments.
Yes.
Certainly, good morning, again for the committee, Charlie McIntyre from the lottery, my director, and
Good morning, Cooley Arroyo, Chief Compliance Officer. Nice to see you all.
so Senator Murphy, as to your question, and thank you for it, we certainly read it as the moratorium that exists now would be covering, that this section would cover the moratorium as it exists now. We hadn't considered at the end of 7 years whether it would be or not, and it certainly isn't crystal clear that indeed it would be, because it says at the end of this you had to be eligible as of the existence of this term when this bill became effective. So it certainly maybe need to cleaned up.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you, and I know this is unusual. I am not here to make 14 license holders extremely wealthy people. I want to be clear that this bill is intended to open a market for as many applicants as wish to apply, that are otherwise qualified, would be able to enter the market, not just 14 or 15 or 16 companies. And so that's what I'm being told, right?
You're being told that the language here is of certain, it's certainly gray as to that. Like, and honestly, the question as to whether the marketplace has 14 or 40 or 400 is a policy decision of this body, not for us. We're in the executive branch. We execute laws. You folks pass them. And so that certainly would leave it to you, Senator, and your colleagues.
So I just want to make sure we're clear on this, because I know what I intended, but I'm also want to make sure that that's what the bill says. So the way I understand this, again, suitability checks and licensing were done in 287D, which is where the moratorium exists. The moratorium has a date certain expiration in the moratorium. I don't remember the date off the top of my head. And the way this bill reads is that if you're looking at that law, after the moratorium expires, there is no moratorium, and therefore you'd be eligible. Is that the way you read this?
And my colleague who actually went to law school, we both went to law school. She just practiced law more recently than I have. I think, I don't know what your reading is.
I agree. As I read the text of the bill, I construed it to say that if you were eligible for an HHR license under 287D, the moratorium would apply. So therefore, when the moratorium expires, the pool of potential applicants would expire as well after that moratorium expires,
And then license would become open to anybody and everybody,
pending all the other criteria, of course.
depending on the other criteria, of course. Oh, Mr.
Thank you,
No,
Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I heard you say it's a gray area, which is scary to hear in any bill. And I just want to follow up with some of what my colleagues said as well. You know, reading this bill, it seems like it allows a small number of entities to operate these VLTs, and that could create monopolization or favoritism. Is that what I'm understanding?
Certainly, as it exists now, the pool of applicants is limited, and that was a law passed during the last session for a moratorium of 7 years. And that's the existing law. Now, no legislature can bind a future legislature, so that really 7 years is more of a guideline than it is actual hard and fast law. You folks can decide to do away with it, it's done away with. But as it exists now, the folks who are applicants who are in before the deadline are the only folks who can offer historic horse racing machines going forward. And by this law would be the ones to offer VLTs until that moratorium extinguishes.
Thank you.
Further questions for lottery? Seeing none. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? We had two sign in favor of the bill, but did not wish to speak. Alicia?
Sorry, I forgot to check the box. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Alicia Preston. I represent the New Hampshire Charitable Gaming Operators Association. We are here in favor of this bill. As the chairman pointed out when he presented it, this is a recommendation from a study commission that spent a lot of time looking into this, used Spectrum Gaming Group's data to analyze it as well. It's kind of a natural progression of the industry at this point. We also understand the discussion about increasing the tax from 25% because there are operational costs that do not exist with video lottery terminals that do exist with historic racing. We've done a little bit of our own analysis, and we think a 30% tax is a 5% increase or 5-point increase from that 25% is reasonable. I understand the chairman has said he's open to a discussion on this and would like some data from us, and whatever you need, we're happy to provide to have an ongoing discussion of what that tax rate should be. We also want to weigh in on the statewide self-exclusion database. We are in support of that as well. We think it's a good move.
Questions for Alicia? Seeing none. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on Senate Bill 83? Seeing none. Online, we have 83. We had 4 in support, 2 opposed online. And with that, I will close the public hearing on Senate Bill 83. And we can jump straight into the next one. Yep. You can just pass it over to Victoria if you have to go. But my testimony's in. Okay.
Only 3 minutes behind schedule. We're going to call the final bill of the day, Senate Bill 168. Open that hearing, recognize the prime sponsor, Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Still Senator Tim Lang, still from District 2, still from the Lakes region. In front of you is a bill, surprise, it's a gaming bill again. This is about online gaming. So in New Hampshire, and I meant to make the statement when I was talking about the horse racing, we actually prohibit all forms of gaming unless explicitly allowed by law in New Hampshire. That's a different part of the gaming statute, but all gaming is considered illegal unless the legislature has authorized it. So here's a case of, I'm looking to authorize an activity, online gaming, allow you to play a game of poker or blackjack from your phone or from your couch, in your home, from your computer, whatever. In this instance, you have an amendment. I made a huge mistake in the bill. I'm willing to admit that. In the revenue structure and trying to work the revenue structure out, I accidentally cut out the charities, which was not my intention at all. I basically want, in this bill, which is different than last year, because I heard the concerns of everybody, this is what's called a tethered bill, meaning that the gaming operator would have to pick their partner, and they'd have a skinned application, and the person playing blackjack on their phone would be treated the same as if the person was sitting in the facility. The same tax rates apply, the same revenue cuts apply, revenue shares apply. The only difference is the person's able to do it on their phone. So the charities would make more money and everything else. So the amendment I put in fixes the charity problem that I created in the original bill when I carved out. So I'm going to ask, when we're talking about revenue, I'm going to refer to the amendment because that was the intention of the bill. I just screwed it up. Other than that, this bill just, again, as I said, seeks to treat online gaming the same as we do current gaming. And just allow it online. The facilities would make more money. The charities would make more money. There's a revenue. I think the estimated revenue was to the state was around $39 million. The revenue splits are similar to what you saw before. I have 25% going to education, 25% to the elderly tax credit, because the revenue from the first bill, if we pass the BLT, still isn't enough to get to 100% of that tax credit. So by adding this revenue to that revenue, we would hit the $24 million mark that is necessary to make all towns whole on the elderly and tax credit, and would ease the burden of property taxpayers in each town. And then again, and I'm open to discussion, the revenue, I dumped the balance of the money into the general fund. As we know, we're having a revenue shortfall here in the state. We're gonna have some expenses. I made education, this will be new revenue to education, so education will get a bump in its revenue. But I don't want all of money to go to the education. I wanted some of it to go to the general fund, because as you know, we signed a new CBA agreement last year, what the governor did last term, and there are pay raises in our budget that we have to pay for. Troopers, we got to hire. We have some initiatives regarding recruitment and retention of even people over at DOT, and we're going to need money for all of those things. So I put the money into the general fund for the legislature to decide how it wants to spend that revenue, rather directly into the education trust fund. Other than that, I think that's the whole bill. I'm happy to take questions. There are some anti-terrorism components, again, because we're dealing with an application and another country that may be delivered from out of state. We make sure that we have no bad actors. If a company is doing something illegal internationally, we don't want them being partners with the state of New Hampshire.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions of the sponsor? Seeing none. Thank you. Looks like Ms. Preston, you're up again.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Again, Alicia Preston with the New Hampshire Charitable Gaming Operators Association, and we're here to speak in opposition of this bill. We greatly appreciate the chairman's efforts to tether the online gaming with the physical facilities, but we still feel, as this is a growing industry in New Hampshire and it's expanding and evolving, that the brick and mortars have invested an enormous amount of money, energy, and infrastructure to exist. While tethering them to the online gaming will give them some financial benefit, it also will take away that street traffic. And that street traffic is what these people have built these buildings for, right? These beautiful expanses that they've done, new construction, is for the physical people to be there. And a lot of that will be lost. If you look at almost any jurisdiction in the United States of gaming, with the exception possibly of Vegas, the biggest casino in a state that has both is the online gaming community. And so that's a little bit of a concern for us. We also are concerned with the food and beverage side of this. If people are staying home to do it from their couch, they're not going to the restaurants, the bars, and the potential activities, concerts, shows, singers, things like that. So that's why we think it's just a little too premature at this time until we see what the growth out of charitable gaming in New Hampshire is.
Questions from the committee? I have one for you, Alicia.
Yes, dear.
So are you aware of the American Gaming Association, the gaming association in the United States, and its study from the summer that talked about online gaming, and it reported that there was no cannibalization of brick and mortar facilities in the states that implemented online gaming?
I am. But here's the difference. New Hampshire is very unique. We currently have 12 operating casinos, 14 that are licensed, potentially 5 coming down the road. That is a lot of physical buildings to support. That's a lot of brick and mortar for a small state to support. It's unlike almost any other, particularly in the Northeast. So if those are moved to online and from their couches, New Hampshire's in a unique situation of where are all the people coming to support these businesses who have been here for years supporting charities in the state and state revenue. And that's where I think New Hampshire's a little more different than what that study took into account.
Okay. Do you think that this bill, if passed, would result in more money going to charities?
I don't know the answer to that.
I'm sorry?
I don't know the answer to that. I think it benefits charities, which is a good add. Anytime charities are included, we're happy. They're the foundation of this entire industry in the state of New Hampshire. But it is a balance, and we need to balance the industries that have been here as well, providing these jobs. I mean, there are 1,400 employees of these facilities right now. If they shrink in physical location, there'll be jobs lost as well. So there's got to be kind of a balance between the benefit of everyone involved. And there are a lot of people who benefit from this, from the state to the charities, to the facilities, to the employees.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's 168, yeah, that's all I have. Does anybody else wish to testify on some? Why don't you come on up and just give me your names, I can add you to the list and who you represent? I'm sorry, can you state your name and, yeah, hit your microphone button?
Brianne Dora Shawal, I believed I signed in and asked to speak with the Campaign for Fair Gambling. I do have copies of my testimony here. Again, for the record, my name is Brianne Dora Schwal. I'm an international problem gambling policy expert and advocate, and I'm here on behalf of the National Campaign for Fair Gambling. And our role, as we see it, is to drive all of the awareness that we can to the issue of this public health issue of problem gambling, doing everything we can to ultimately prevent and reduce it. And I'd like to begin my remarks by reading what I believe are very relevant national headlines in markets that currently have legalized iGaming. A psychiatrist tried to quit gambling. Betting apps kept her hooked. Pennsylvania. As legal gambling explosion puts a casino in your pocket, Connecticut grapples with how to protect bettors. Helpline calls have more than doubled since legalizing online gaming. West Virginia. Online gambling booms, fuels addiction, Michigan. There are an estimated 9 million Americans that currently struggle with gambling addiction. An estimated 25,000 of them reside here in New Hampshire. There is an estimated $14 billion annual social cost to addressing this important public health issue. See, problem gambling carries the highest rates of shame and stigma of all the addictions. And as a result, two things are true. The average person will suffer more than a decade before reaching out for help. And an individual is 15 times more likely to die by suicide if they're struggling. A notable addiction gambling psychiatrist, Dr. Timothy Fong of UCLA, recently said the following: mobile gambling is the fast food gambling, highly processed gambling, sanitized and synthesized by a computer that is exactly designed to hit the dopamine. And you know what? Research is beginning to highlight just how true that is. In fact, a recent report out of Connecticut found that 70% of the revenues are coming from 7% of the population, 1.8% of them having a gambling problem, and 4.9% of them being at risk. A New Jersey report found a market that is often heralded as the gold standard, two things. iGaming diverts funding that would have been spent on other sectors, and that iGaming is driving upwards of a $350 million annual social cost in healthcare, welfare, and criminal justice. Research is clear. Anytime you introduce a new form of gambling into a jurisdiction, you will be introducing new problems. And I testify before you today that there's forthcoming research that's going to highlight that this may not be a value add to your community, but a detriment. Right now, New Hampshire is ranked one of the worst in the nation as it relates to your commitment to addressing this public health issue. In fact, you're 39th out of 43rd. This means you're working at an already deficit at addressing what will become a bigger issue. Problem gambling is not an individual one. It's a family one, it's a community one, and it's a state one. I encourage you all to consider going into this policy decision with eyes wide open, and that it may result in more harm than good. I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Senator Pitt.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. So I just want to follow up on that statistic, how low we are. Are you saying that relates to the addiction treatments we offer and resources like that in the state?
Yes, so currently right now you have $100,000 committed annually to problem gambling. A good policy would include things such as research, prevention, treatment, and aftercare. All four of those things cannot be achieved with a tiny $100,000 commitment. Other states who are considering similar policies like this are often embarking on a research project ahead of time to understand what the social and economic implications to the state would be prior to. I haven't seen that discussed here today.
So, thank you for that. I mean, that's very helpful. It's curious, what other states are doing. So you're saying, a lot of states are kind of doing the research beforehand and allocating far more better resources to gambling before we kind of expand it. Is what you're saying.
So forgive me, I don't have the data point in front of me. I believe the annual per capita contribution is something like 45 cents. You're not even trending anywhere near that. Your neighbor of Massachusetts commits $22 million per year into addressing this public health issue. I'm not saying that's appropriate or culturally needed here, but we don't know that because we don't have the research to suggest how bad of an issue this is and what any additional gambling would cause here.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. With that, is there anybody else in the room that wishes to testify on Senate Bill 168? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on Senate Bill 168. We're going to take a 15-minute recess. We'll come back at 11:15. I mean, at 10:45. That's off by now. 10:45. And we'll see if there's any consensus to executive bills. Just got there. We did exec one. Yeah. Well, it's one of the things to get and do the PLA implementation law and change the funding without legislating. It wasn't intended to be. That's the way that law. So you, Sonia. Back in session, I would entertain a motion to go into exec. Been moved by Senator Roosevelt, seconded by Senator Sullivan to go into executive session. And we'll take the bills in order. So I'm going to make a motion of auto pass on Senate Bill 60.
And I'll second.
Been moved and seconded auto pass on Senate Bill 60. Again, this is the historic horse racing bill, not the historic, this is the advanced deposit wagering, again, just legalizing online betting. New Hampshire has that blanket law that says all gaming is illegal unless we legalize it. And the Attorney General feels there's some gray area here, and they asked for this bill to make sure we acknowledge it is a legal function in the state of New Hampshire. Any other questions?
I do, and I'm sorry I missed the public hearing because I would have asked, but I was introducing some bills. So I went back to your last year's version of this bill, and it's a little bit different. And so I wanted to ask about two sections. The first one is section 1, Roman 4G.
Or G.
So
Annually
it's
contracted.
like on page 2, starting on line 7.
Is that the one, the annual? Are you talking
Yes.
about the annual contract with an independent third party for security audits and submit results to the commission?
Right. So last year, you also had a sentence that said, if the licensed advance deposit wagering provider is a wholly owned subsidiary of a public traded company, submission of audited financial statements of the publicly traded parent company contained in a public filing with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission shall satisfy this requirement. That seemed to me like it lowered maybe the burden on the Lottery Commission, but it's not in here this year, and I'm wondering why you took it out.
So again, this bill was again rerun through lottery to make the changes. And they felt that the filings that they do through the normal process of requesting information from licensees would satisfy the need. They didn't need that. They could submit that anyway as their financial filing. Here's the auditing. We didn't need a law to do that. The law would have made it restrictive rather than permissive, saying this is the only form you could do, rather than if they chose a different form. So it
Okay.
allows an either or, so they felt it was less on there.
Okay, thank you for that. And my second question is about Roman 6.
Yep.
Last year's version said the commission may withdraw approval of a plan of operation for cause. And so now there's no requirement that cause be shown. And it seems like maybe the Lottery Commission could be more, well,
So,
they could make decisions.
so you're looking
just-
at the end of line 10 on page 2, where it says, that last sentence is, the commission may withdraw approval of a plan of operation.
Yeah, line
And
11.
you're,
Well, last year was line 11.
but
Right.
this one's 10, and you're looking to just add the words
For
for
cause.
cause.
It just seems like that's fair to these businesses.
So let's hold that, and in case there's any other changes, we'll do it all as one, rather than
Okay.
do it as a separate vote. So what else do you have on this bill?
And nothing else that's really critical.
Substantive, okay. Are you guys okay with, as a committee amendment, if we add at the end, on page 2, at the end of line 10, the word for cause? Is that reasonable? All right. So Senator Roosevelt made the motion to amend the bill on page 2, line 10, to add at the end of that sentence, change the period to a comma and change it to add the words for cause.
I don't think we need a comma.
Well, otherwise there's a period there, and it's a new sentence. So, and I'll second that.
Thank you.
All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Is there any other further discussion or amendment on the bill? Seeing none, all those in favor of OTPA on the bill signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. I'd entertain a motion for consent.
Yes.
Been moved consent by Senator Roosevelt, seconded by Senator Murphy to put the bill on consent. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The bill will go on consent, and I'll take it out. The next bill, we already dealt with the travel and tourism bill. Cindy, that was a 4-0 vote and went on consent. The next bill I'd like to take up is Senate Bill 159, establish a marine habitat fee, and I recognize Senator Murphy.
I move ITO.
It's been moved ITL by Senator Murphy, seconded by Senator Sullivan. Senator Murphy, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I recognize the impetus for the bill. I understand it and how important it is that the beaches, that the wildlife is maintained correctly. In this current economic environment, I think it's difficult to justify placing a new fee. So I have to oppose any sort of fee like this.
Senator Roosevelt?
Thank you. I mean, I don't like new fees a whole lot either. This is a self-funded agency, and it's the only one that is not able to self-fund. And last budget, they came to us for general funds. They're back at it already this year. We have to either, I think, take away some of their responsibilities, or we have to allow them the ways they would need to be self-funded, as all other self-funded agencies are. So I'm going to have to oppose this motion just because I don't want to be spending general funds on this department when they're supposed to be self-funded, and that's what we're going to end up more than likely having to do because they just can't function properly.
So I'll just add myself again. I'm going to support the ITL motion because I think that at this time with the economic crisis that we're in relative to, cost of eggs, right? Your basic life things that to charge another fee on someone who wants to go out deep sea fishing is probably doing a recreational activity. It's probably not the time to do that when they're already struggling. And I want to encourage people to get outside and do things. I think it's good for their health and I think it's good for their mental health. So adding a fee at this time, while I recognize, understand that this cost and this fee there's no new service that's being requested here. It's just the funding of existing services that they're already providing. And so I think they're going to have to manage within the budget that they have and maybe take a look at this in 2 more years and hopefully the economy will turn around and we'll have a better position where maybe adding this fee makes sense. With that, I'll call a vote. All those in favor of ITL signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
The bill will be, it's 3-2, and the bill will not be on consent, I'm assuming. So, and I'll take the bill out, unless, when you guys want to take it out? Keith, you want to take it out?
Sure.
Senator Murphy will take it. No. And with that, we're gonna, I'd entertain a motion to come out of executive session. It's been moved by Senator Roosevelt, seconded by Senator Sullivan to come out of executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We're out of executive session with the business of the committee being done. We will meet next week. My goal is the 12th. The calendar should, you should know all the remaining bills will be on the calendar. My goal is by the end of that day to exec every bill. So if you have an amendment, you have something you want to bring in on a bill, please go to OLS, get it drafted. If you have questions about a bill we've heard, you come to see me. I'm happy to take conversation. And let's be ready next week for a fast-moving committee here. All right?
Thank you.
With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.